Let's welcome Dave Hodges of the Commonsense Show.
It's great to be back here. I'm Dave Hodges, and thanks for that promo up there, Ernie. I do have the Commonsense Show, and we've expanded it. It's a good thing we did, because I've had some people come after me. Some of it may be unintentional, I don't know. Some of it's deliberate, I know. So we've expanded our operations. We used to be just website centralized, and we are no longer. Thank God I'd be out of business if we were. My website traffic a week ago, we were used to getting 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 a day. We got 1,500. And I had a webmaster for 4 years who I paid a good amount of money to convert my website to an individual server because it had grown so much. And the job got botched. So if some of you trying to go to my website, you don't see an article that is newer than 5 days old, you were part of what happened to me. And when that job got botched, and I want to give him credit, Daniel Clausen, Cymax Media, he simply dumped the project, and he refused to make any corrections while he was still under contract. So are we going to litigate? I'm looking into it. First, my priority is to get fully functional with the website, and we're fully functional in other areas. But the website is something that we really need to put special attention on. I hired 2 experts to come in and look at what happened to us. And let's just put it this way. Neglect is a kind word, and I won't say more than that because this may get litigated. So if you've had trouble with my website, this is why. Now, I've got my website in the hands of competent people. Excuse me. Dr. Ted Brower of healthmasters.com offered his services in helping me procure his webmaster, who is full, and this guy is the best there is. And so we will be back, and we will hit our stride again. As far as YouTube goes, yeah, Ernie's right. We fight the battles. The UN comes out with a public document that gets printed all across the country. It's a human right for abortion and assisted suicide. So I commented on it on YouTube, demonetized before it even got published. And so that's just an example of what we deal with. But YouTube is still holding steady. I belong to a consortium of people called Republic Digital, and we have a measure of protection against YouTube tyranny. And I say a measure, not a full measure, a measure. Otherwise, I would have gone the way of Mike Adams and Alex Jones a long time ago. But we do have a measure of protection there with some connections from this group. So we think we're going to stay viable, but we've expanded our operation into something called Megaphone. And Megaphone is an example of what's happening in our industry, where we're taking our radio shows and our podcasts, and we're finding centralized locations for them. And you can access Megaphone just by going to the Commonsense Show on Google, I always forget these, Google Play, iTunes, Spotify. You know, obviously I didn't set all this stuff up. And this is really going to be the wave of our future. And we're kind of in our infancy with Megaphone, but this is really where we're going to focus. But we are going to shore up the website. We are going to maintain YouTube as long as possible. We are going to maintain the radio show as long as possible. In fact, actually, I'm shedding some of my work responsibilities during the day next spring, and we're going to expand the radio show. And I think there's a lot of people say radio's dead. That's not what my numbers are telling me. Radio's very much alive for us. So we're going to continue along that venue. So the thing that I tell new people getting into this is you better diversify, because if you've got a single choke point of information, they'll take you down, and they know how hard it'll be to get it back. With us, you know, people know pretty well that if you can't get something on the website, you go to my YouTube. Now there's Megaphone. So we had a little bit of diversity built into our platforms, and this is what's enabled us to survive. And also on the YouTube, they do play games with me. We're making some money on the front end, but we sell back-end advertising. And we have found a lot of advertisers who love this country, hate what's happening to it, and they're more than happy to support what I'm doing. So we've been fortunate on that end. So anyway, that's kind of the business report. But I know some of you might have had questions. Gee, what happened to you, Dave, on your website? Well, I just told you, and I can't say this webmaster did it intentionally, but he is guilty of willful neglect, breach of contract. I could go on with a bunch of other things. And so that kind of put us in a bind, and for that, if you've been inconvenienced, I apologize, but by going through what else we do, you can get still pretty much the same information. With the voter fraud thing that you brought up, I want to comment on that a little bit. I spent an evening having dinner with former Phoenix City Councilwoman Frances Barwood and her husband Mike, and then some mutual friends that we had in common back in the 90s. I don't remember the exact year, I think it was maybe 97, 98. You remember Frances, the Phoenix Lights? Yeah, okay. Listen, I'll tell you, solid person. She told us stories of voter fraud that night, including unmitigated murder, hit and run delivered against whistleblower. She laid it out. My former state senator, Jack Harper, who helped me a lot with my property rights fight against John McCain and his globalist friends, Jack was telling me stuff. In fact, actually, Jack took a stand against voter fraud that happened in Ahwatukee to a colleague of his. It basically ended his political career. He was a rising star. And a lot of people said, he's going to hold a high position in Arizona state government, but he wouldn't play the game. So, you know, I've heard these stories for years and years and years. And the one question I have I'd like to ask of you, and maybe you don't have the answer, but I was listening to KTR, which is, in my mind, totally gone rogue now. At least they used to have the appearance of supporting the people and the Constitution and Bill of Rights. They no longer even care about the pretense anymore. But they were reporting that the head of the Maricopa elections was saying, the Democrat you were referencing, he was saying, well, the reason the vote flipped in one day with McSally and Sinema was it went from 1% ahead for McSally to 2% down. Well, the Democrats rushed all their paper ballots in the last minute. Well, I'd like to know, how would he know that? There's nothing identifiable on the surface. You're not allowed to ask when you get it. So how the hell did this guy know it, or was it a thinly veiled excuse to cover up the voter fraud he knew was going on? It's the latter. That's what I suspected too. He belongs in jail. He belongs in jail.
Just do what you said, capital punishment. It's treason. It's treason. It's sedition.
It is sedition.
Actually, it's treason when a government official, when they take oaths of office, they can be found, and it has been found guilty of treason because they're undermining their Constitution and laws.
We're in the neighborhood. Listen, guys, we're in the neighborhood with what you're saying. I think we're all in agreement. We may differ on some of the legal terms and what should be done, but you know, Ernie's right. The system is hopelessly broken. And my point of bringing up Frances Barwood to show you that this has been here for a long, long, long time. In fact, actually, I remember I encountered somebody in Arizona government, I don't remember their name now, and they told me, well, Jan Brewer told me this. Jan Brewer was a school board member where I was hired to teach and coach basketball when I first came here. And I had a meeting with her, we had a party, a bunch of people in common, and I was complaining about something. She goes, welcome to Arizona, we have the best politicians that money can buy. And that always stuck with me. This was before she got into state politics. So we have an illustrious history, but if you think it's unique here, it's not. I grew up in Colorado, and I was friends with the children of the McNichols family. Steve, Bill, McNichols Arena, Nuggets played there, governor, mayor of Denver. They were brothers. These guys, we used to sit at the table sometimes, and they would tell me horror stories about kickback contracts to city councilmen to tow away cars. And so I grew up hearing this stuff. It's not unique to us. It's all across the country. And as they say, if voting mattered, they wouldn't let you do it. I mean, that's the bottom line. And, Ernie, I used to wrinkle my nose up when you had that sign, still voting LOL. I don't think you made a big enough deal about it.
Still voting with the question mark and the D was the D from the dead.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Ernie, it's just, the elections mean nothing, and there's going to have to be more of a grassroots solution to this. And if you think, if you go to my website, which many of you do, you see I do not advocate for violence. Any reference to violence would be strictly self-defense. But if you think we're getting out of this without bloodshed, widespread bloodshed, you're fooling yourself. We're way past the point of no return. And it's something that when I say that to other groups besides groups like this, oh, you're pessimistic, you're fatalistic, you're exaggerating, that's hyperbole. Well, some of the things we're going to talk about today will kind of illustrate the futility. What we need to do now, we're in the organization phase. You know, who's going to be on this side of the line, who's going to be on that side of the line. Ernie, I remember you said it was about 10 or 12 years ago, we were meeting over in Paradise Valley. You're talking about people, you better get ready, because if you're on the other side of that fence, I know you not. I remember that quote. And Ernie's right. If you're not ready now, chances are you're not going to be ready. Let's talk about something that just happened. I wasn't going to talk about it until it just happened. But the raid on the whistleblower for the Clinton Foundation. If we need any further example of the breakdown of rule of law, I mean, the FBI is the mafia. Let's just be honest. Are there good people in the FBI? Yes. I have FBI sources. They care deeply about what's going on. And what a couple of them do, they point me to open source intelligence so they don't go to jail for violating secrets. And they say, you need to look at this, look at that. But if you look at the FBI and they raid the home of a whistleblower for the Clinton Foundation, and they take evidence in an attempt to stop a congressional investigation, what do you call this? That's more powerful than the mafia has. I mean, who has to worry about MS-13 when you got the FBI doing this kind of crap? And this is just part and parcel to the total breakdown of the rule of law. And basically, when they talk about justice, that old joke, it's just us. I mean, this is what we're now facing. We're facing life in a country that's totally uncertain. Things can turn on a dime. I wrote an article this morning, and I'll just kind of summarize some of the high points. I got to know Larry Grathwohl. How many of you remember him, Larry Grathwohl? He was an FBI undercover agent in the late 60s, and I interviewed him a bunch, and we got to be friends, and let's put it this way, he died under, I think, very mysterious circumstances. And he started going public with what he found. And he had befriended Bill Ayers as part of his mission with the Weatherman Underground. And Bill Ayers told him, and there was a YouTube video about this that was made, I think YouTube has now since taken it down, but he said that he asked Bill Ayers one time, what will you do when you guys in the Weathermen, they were Ivy League graduates, the sons and daughters of people who were people of note and influence, they weren't your typical 60s radicals, let's parade around and take LSD at Berkeley. That's not who these people were. They were people of some means and substance. And Bill Ayers said, well, when we finally take over, we'll have to incarcerate about 50 million Americans and do away with 25 million. And Larry was very, very permanent. Bill Ayers and his wife, Bernadine Dorn, served time in their role in the death of 2 different police officers in 2 different instances. And Bill Ayers, with his father, is the person who started Barack Obama's political career. They had a party in their Hyde Park, Chicago home to kick off his election run to the state senate. And this has been validated. Jordan Pyle put a lot of info on this, had some affidavits from a guy named Hutton, who was the postman who put Obama there. I mean, there's so much confirming information on this. But you need no more confirming information that Bill Ayers used to visit the White House a lot when Obama was in power. And just stay with me, because we're going to follow this connecting the dots. Yes?
This last week or so, CNN commentator Don Lemon cut the cat out of the bag and said exactly that on national TV, that for practical purposes, they're going to have to do something with all the white people, all white guys.
Yeah, I saw that.
Did you see that?
Yes.
That's exactly what you just talked about.
Yep. Makes me an endangered species.
Yeah,
You too.
all of us.
Yeah. But you know, I refuse to let it become a division of race, because I know too many people of color who think that's bullshit. And they tell me so, and they write to me, and they talk to me. Can they get enough? Oh yeah, Antifa appeals to thugs who can't get jobs, who would probably be in prison otherwise, and George Soros pays them money. So you ought to imagine they're going to get some people to stir some things up. But are we going to see a race war is kind of where you're kind of leading with this, and the Charles Manson notion of helter-skelter? I have a hard time believing it's going to really get traction. But I will tell you this, it's interesting. What you just said put me in the mind of the movie The Purge, the election year. How many of you saw that? You should. It's on Netflix. My son made me watch it. You know, my soon-to-be 18-year-old son said, Dad, you need to watch this. Well, The Purge couldn't get off the ground. They wanted to have a 24-hour cycle of absolute unpunished crime And the idea was you'd kill lots of poor people, no welfare, the economy will boost, and the economic numbers in the movie supported doing the purge. Well, people had parties of unity rather than killing each other until the government sent in their goon squads. And then the killing started and people got afraid and they did start to participate in the violence out of self-defense. And to your point, with Don Lemon's kind of comments and you had Antifa and Soros and that whole crowd, you know, I suppose you could light a match. But anyway, going back to what I was saying with Larry and the fact that who was behind the rise of Barack Obama, if you look at what he did from a tyrannical standpoint, he weakened the defenses in the United States. He nearly wrecked our economy. I mean, almost beyond repair. And you could argue it probably is beyond repair because of the debt that he doubled when he was in office. But he was only the setup guy. If you'll permit me a baseball analogy, he was the 8th inning setup guy. And Hillary Clinton was to be the 9th inning closer to come in and shut things down. Unfortunately, a funny thing happened on the way to closing, and his name was Donald Trump. But the thing is about Donald Trump, and I'll say this, there's a lot I'm not a fan of, but realistically, if you want some measure of due process, if you go to court, if you want some measure of a civilized society, Donald Trump's the only girl in town right now. If you think there are many people out there right now that take some of the stands he's taking, opposition to free trade agreements, I mean, I only dreamed about that when NAFTA came around. And when NAFTA passed, I thought, no, we're never going to see a viable economic America again. And we're still not because of the debt. But Trump did reverse a lot of it. And so I look at him, he's the only person, in my opinion, right now, at this point in time, who could do this. I think Rand Paul would probably be a good substitute, Governor Abbott from Texas. You know, people who I've had some contact with, also through mutual contacts, perhaps. But we look at what's happening here. So when Hillary Clinton failed, then the move to bring down this country and subjugate us to a global governance authority and a one-world economic system, it fell to the deep state. And the deep state is what we're seeing do now. And part of that is manifested when Ernie was talking about with social media censorship. We can't let the people hear the truth. I mean, at one point in time, and I stopped comparing, but I was comparing my numbers to CNN during the same time slots, and I was kicking their butt. And I wasn't alone. So was Doug Hagman, so were all of my friends in the independent media. We were destroying the mainstream media in ratings. And this is why they had to take action against us. Can't let the cat out of the bag, can't let the people know. Because I look at it this way, to various degrees, I estimate there's about 15 to 20% of us who knows what's going on to various degrees. But only a small fraction of that are really even activists. And then we go and look and say, okay, how much on the other side? Well, you're always going to find the something for nothing followers. You know, like the millennials who typically want socialism because they've been promised something for doing nothing. And they've had that their whole life. When they played sports as kids, everybody got a ribbon, everybody got a trophy. And this is the mentality now of the people in their 20s and 30s that really is one of our biggest opponents, because they would like to see this transformation that's coming. They would like to see a communist takeover of this country, a blending into a global authority without the Constitution. I had an undergraduate ask me this question the other day. Why are you so opposed to globalism? I said, I guess I'm not. Let me just bring some guys over to your house tonight with a badge. We'll kick your door down and we'll look for evidence of a crime. And then when we find one, after we search high and low, we'll take your ass off to jail. He said, you can't do that. I said, why can't I? He said, you have to have a search warrant. I said, you're talking about rules under the United States. You're not talking about a global authority that's going to usurp those rules and they will no longer exist. He goes, well, and I said, do you know that 90% of the nations that belong to the United Nations are tin-horn, third-world dictatorships? Do you think they're going to vote to preserve your constitutional authority?
You're a sitting duck, basically.
He said, we are, all of us.
Yeah.
All of us are sitting ducks for this. So going forward with this, you look at deep state tyranny now that took over the mission of Hillary Clinton. And this deep state tyranny is manifested in Robert Mueller. Now, forgive me if I sound like I'm bragging, but to the best of my knowledge, I was the first person to print in writing with 2 documents to back it up, July 20th, 2017, and I had the information for about 8 months, but I had trouble getting everything in order, because if I came out and just said it, people would have laughed at me. Robert Mueller, the former head of the FBI, while he was head of the FBI, delivered highly enriched uranium to the Russians 2009 on behalf of the Clinton Foundation. I published the article on July 20th, 2017. I had the information far earlier, but I couldn't pull together all the connecting dots to make it seem like it was a comprehensible position to take. So therefore, you look at that date. Now, other people followed, but you know what? Fox News, they'll tell you, uranium won, bad, bad, bad. You were the Russians, but nothing about Mueller. And you look at a lot of people, even in my side of things, they don't talk about Mueller. Mueller was put in his position as special prosecutor to basically do two things. One, to cover up this crime. Number two, to keep Russia and America apart. Let me finish this point, and then I'll take a couple questions. Let me just finish the point here.
I just wanted to confirm that on my Twitter feed, I got about a 28-page deal on Mueller that just happened. So if you go on America Blue.
Well, all you need to do is go to the Commonsense show, go to the date that I just mentioned, and look at the Rostov memo from Russia and the State Department memo, and they both confirm each other in different words. Mueller was there, he delivered the uranium. But the main thing, the globalists want to kill nationalism. Now, we can argue the pros and cons of nationalism. Yes, I know it's a contributing factor to all wars, and I've heard all those arguments from the liberal perspective. And there's merit to that position. But there's also merit to the position that if you put the power of the planet in the hands of a few, what's that saying about absolute power corrupts absolutely? Okay, this is what we're going to be looking at. And Mueller's mission also is to keep Putin and Trump apart. And I do talk to someone who speaks to the president on a regular basis, and obviously I'm not going to go further than that. So does my friend Paul Preston, and we both know we're talking to a couple of different people, but the message is the same. There is a deep desire with both parties to have an alliance of nationalist nations. And if you don't think that's true, then ask yourself this question. Why did French President Macron come out last week and say, one, we need a European army, okay? And he said, and we need to defend against Russia, China, and the United States. Our NATO ally is threatening us. And then he comes out 3 days later and says, nationalism is unpatriotic. We need to serve the needs of the global community. He's telling you right there what this is all about. This is all about nationalism versus globalism. And I hate to be totally tribal, because, you know, at my root, I hate political parties. Government's always going to be corrupt. If you give people power, they go batshit crazy with it. But the bottom line is, I don't want what the other side's bringing a whole lot more than what we have now. What we have now is bad enough, and this is what we used to fight against. But what's coming, if we allow it to come, if we get the deep state globalist view of justice, there will be no justice.
Right.
And you, some of us, most of us in this room, will find out the true meaning of what the FEMA camps were built for. It wasn't for illegal aliens. That's the story. George H.W. Bush, and so he made his conversion, God rest his soul, at the end of his days. But he told us
They
that.
ran out of babies to feed him, that's why he died.
Okay. But to kind of close the loop on this point, Putin and America both are preparing for war against each other. Make no mistake about it. Okay, Putin is going to defend his country at all costs. But his job to keep Russia independent of the globalists. And by the way, did you catch the fact that he threatened to nuke them about 6 weeks ago? He said, I'll nuke the globalists. How many of you heard that? It was out there.
You said that, can you repeat that again?
He said, Putin said he'd have no compunction to nuke the globalists if they make a move on Russia. And he was speaking directly to the people that are connected to the Bank of International Settlements.
Is that in Belgium?
Yes, Brussels.
Brussels. Okay, thank you.
Well, Putin's that's the reason they hate him so much.
Well, that's why. And the Chinese government, as despicable as they are nationalists. And it runs in the face of globalism and capitulation. The European Union, if you look at Merkel, she let her country get utterly destroyed. You look at Italy,
Western Europe.
all of it, all of it falls under this guise. And Europe now is rebelling. The people are rebelling. Ernie?
When, yeah, we just did a too, but one thing I wanted to get your perspective on was when the G20 was going on just a few days ago, and you had, Putin and Saudi Arabia, man, their buds were tied down, look what we're getting, something. Then you had Trump cancel the meeting that he was going to have with Putin. As he's walking, you see them look at each other. Putin's like, there's some personal relationship there going on, but there's a game being played, and they both know it. So I didn't get the impression that Putin and Trump are on antagonistic towards each other, but there's a superficial game that's going on around them, and they know it. Do you know what's going on?
Yeah, I think I do.
Yes.
If you think the Cohen plea deal that implicates Trump with business dealings in Russia was an accident with its timing, it wasn't. It was designed to precede the G20 to keep the two men apart. Because as soon as Trump does this with Putin, that enhances the perception, hey, you're really for the Russians, you're really a traitor, and we should come after you. And it's basically them trying to keep them apart. I'll give you another way this is going on too. There's a journalist in Mexico, and I'm not going to defame the guy, but let's put it this way. I've got friends on our side who tell me, Dave, have nothing to do with this guy. He reached out to me and wanted to run a bunch of stuff through me. So I checked him out. I'd never heard of him before. And he broke the story about Russian tanks in the jungles in Mexico. And that's how he presented it to me. And I thought, well, okay, I know that Russia and China have done military deals all throughout Central and South America. So that didn't surprise me. But they're poised to go. And he told some story, and this is where it became unbelievable. And it comes right back to the point that Ernie's making about, or we're making about keeping Putin and Trump apart. This guy supposedly was driving in a car, crossed into Mexico, stopped to take a leak, went 10 feet off into the jungle and saw thousands of tanks. That's where he lost me. And then I found out the story was dated 2009. So I guess those tanks have been there 9 years waiting for their mission orders. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. But here's the point. This broke and this went viral in the independent media. And what's the message? Russia's going to invade you. Now listen, I'm not saying fight Russia someday. If Putin's not given a choice and America comes down on the side of the globalists, yeah, they will attack us. Don't make no mistake about it, and so will China. But this story put out by Alex Beckman absolutely is false. But it has a mission to it. Putin versus Trump. Keep them apart. And this is what a lot of this is all about. Yes?
Last week, this small naval skirmish in the Black Sea, which is international waters, between Ukraine and Russia, is not what they're telling you it is.
Bridge.
I've been there. I've been to that bridge, and I know exactly what it is. The international protocol, when you're in international waters, you're supposed to radio into the harbor master and tell them who you are, identify yourself, and who your intentions are. And the Ukraine did on purpose did not do that. They violated the sovereign space of the Russian waters under that bridge. And now they're blaming this on Russia. Now, I'm not in love with Russia, but I'm in love with the truth. And the truth is, this is another act which is not being told to the American people. This ought to be investigated.
Well, the whole deal where Russia, basically stopped Ukraine's ships, it was a move of self-defense from what I've been able to determine. It's a provocation move. If you think NATO is being controlled by the United States any longer, think again. We're not. In fact, haven't you found it interesting that Trump is totally silent on what's going on with Ukraine? Those incidences involving NATO, and the fact that NATO's fortifying them. I mean, how would you feel right now if you knew for a fact that along the Canadian border, our enemies were placing high amounts of troops and sophisticated equipment? Think that would raise some questions with us? That's the situation that NATO has put Russia in. And you look at this and you say, this is all about getting World War III started. This is what NATO wants. They want World War III started, and they're putting the United States in a position where you have to decide which side are you going to be on. But they know they have to remove Trump. He has to go. To kill him would put millions of us in the streets. I don't think many things would put us in the streets in America today. But I think killing him would put people in the streets. It would also promote the loss of respect for what he's replaced with. And I'm going to give you a nightmare scenario. I'm not going to get into all the things I know about Pence, that Pence is compromised. And if I can know about Pence being compromised, and at one time Pence was actually planning to take Trump's place. You know he took out a presidential pact on his own right after the inauguration. Now why would you do that when supposedly you're going to be the VP for 4 to 8 years? Well, he thinks he's going to take his place. All of a sudden now Pence is coming out on the side of Trump on a lot of things and enthusiastically supporting him because the globalists have ditched him. And here's my nightmare scenario. Trump goes down for whatever means, whether it be assassination, impeachment, whatever it is, and then they basically blackmail Pence on some phony health reason to retire. Then you have who's going to be the president? Nancy Pelosi. Once they have control, I'm sorry, but that's the order of secession.
I know, but it's not a safe thing.
That'd be awesome. It would.
President Pelosi. We'd have to pass every bill before we could see what's in it.
Wait, you've seen the movie Idiocracy, right?
I have. I've been accused of starring in it. Yes.
Why, during the inauguration in January of 2017, did they vote to take in different votes? I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, I've heard it. I mean,
And what was the question?
can you say it louder? About the oath?
Pence and Trump both took different oaths on the inauguration.
We need different verbiage.
I've asked, I asked this professor from George Washington University who first said that. I asked him to send me something. He said he would. It's almost 2 years later and I haven't heard anything. But I've heard the allegation. I don't know if it's true.
It's true.
Is it true?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what's behind something like that. Those moves, really, Nancy Pelosi takes an oath too. Okay? So does Chuck Schumer. What does it mean? So see, I don't get too worked up about that, right?
One thing, in light of this Russia deal, this last week, the last couple of weeks, there was another gas attack in Syria. Well, this gas attack was done by, and near around Aleppo, was done by the ISIS rebels or whatever on Syrian troops.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody says anything about that. That's not, Western media not hardly on the EPAC of it. So I'm just wondering your comments on that.
Well, I think you already mentioned what it is. When you get into the history of ISIS, you're familiar with Scott Bennett, right? Have you ever interviewed him? I need to hook you two up. Scott Bennett used to report to Bush, W. And he was at Intel. No, but Scott, he is a patriot. Obama threw him in prison for a phony expense report, 2 years. In other words, he didn't do anything wrong. It was framed because he started talking about ISIS. He started talking about other people connected to ISIS, like Hillary Clinton and John McCain. And that's why he got sent off to prison. And I've interviewed Scott a number of times. In fact, here's an interesting thing for you. I'm interviewing him my regular way, and our communications get blocked. So I tried to call him on his cell phone, his house phone, can't get through. For days, we couldn't communicate. The block between my cell phone and his cell phone was there. I could not communicate. I could call him from a third-party phone. That wasn't me. But I haven't been able to interview him since. And we're working on a workaround. We're going to use someone else's equipment. That tells me that the path he was going down, and he was relating Hillary Clinton's role in what you're talking about, with basically making sure that ISIS had these kinds of weapons. He was getting into that, and all of a sudden that discussion was over. And it went no further. But I'll hook you up with Scott. He's a great interview, and he is the real deal. He really was among the first to point out that when John McCain did nothing, in fact, he had a stand-down order to leave military equipment in Iraq, which is a violation of federal law. When you leave a theater of war, you have to destroy the equipment so it can't be used. And John McCain interfered with that, and he was the first to basically break that story too. At the same time, I was telling the story about Lafarge, where Hillary Clinton was on the board of directors for Lafarge, and they were funneling money to ISIS. So Lafarge was a French company. That interesting too.
The same thing happened in Vietnam. We left Vietnamese whole over us.
Yeah, who was that CNN reporter that broke that story and they fired him? I know who you're talking about. Using nerve gas while they were, I think it was they were in Cambodia. One of those will just be here for a few weeks missions. Yeah, and I forget who the guy was. If you said his name, I'd know it. Go ahead.
The Russian problem with Ukraine, this is all by design. We instituted a coup in Kyiv that killed 83 people in 2014. Under our State Department, John Kerry was here before. We picked 3 people to run into the replacement. Unfortunately, it's now president.
Yeah, oh yeah. CIA snipers on the roof. I did an article called Snipers on the Roof, where the CIA put Overwatch and they started assassinating all the established government figures before the overthrow. I mean, they get out of their car, boom, they're shot and killed and dead. Or they'd kill a secretary that was connected. It was crazy. So I did this article called Snipers on the Roof. And I knew right then. Now, you know, the people that are running Ukraine now, first of all, you know, Biden's son was involved. John Kerry obviously was involved. This had the tacit approval of Obama and McCain. Exactly. And you know they're Nazis. And you know there's a Muslim Brotherhood connection there too. And I don't really want to go down that road today. But when you're looking at Ukraine, you're looking at some really evil people with evil backgrounds. And you know, just to give you one teaser, the Muslim Brotherhood arose out of what the Nazis did in North Africa. And we're seeing this again manifested in Ukraine with the descendants and the philosophical leanings of the same kinds of people. I mean, this is really a nasty deal. This is worse for Putin than the Cuban Missile Crisis was for us in 1962. This is a huge national security threat for Russia. And I'm not trying to sound like a Russian apologist, but I'd like to put myself in his position and say, what would I do if this were in my backyard? And I'd be doing exactly what he's doing. And I'd have taken Crimea too, because you've got to have a port, you've got to have base of operations, you need air transport in that area to combat what could be coming your way. I understood exactly then why he took Crimea. Well, yeah.
Okay, wait. April 2014, after the coup in Kyiv, Crimean people wanted to separate from Tonga.
The so-called Russian-speaking Crimean people. There's a difference.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a majority of them, because I go there every year. I said, we're going again in 2 weeks. We're going to be there. I go to Moscow, I go to Peter, I go to Belgrade, and we go to Croatia. And we spend time there. We've got family and friends that are in Russia. And we go there. I got the actual knowledge from the vote that they did in Ukraine, in Crimea, to separate. I was there in 2015-16 when the power was cut to the Crimean people. And I come back here, and the U.S. government says, you know what? The Russians hacked their power plant system and shut their power off. And I was there when the president of Crimea came on and said, no, Ukraine, we would rather freeze to death than return to Ukraine. And so, but nobody tells about that. So the whole thing, I'm sympathetic to Russia only because I know that we're militarizing Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and
the southern Muslim ex-Soviet republics too. That's happening there. You're exactly right. The one thing I just want to interject over what you're saying here is that these people are put into place to undermine Russia, and it's part of basically denationalizing Russia, taking away Putin's power from Russia. You remember when Putin disappeared for about 10 days? I even did an article, had a note card with a space on it called 1-800-Kremlin if you've seen me. Okay, he went away for about 10 days, and then he resurfaces, and he was a little more moderate. I mean, he was like Nikita Khrushchev in his approach, and he was really militant about some of his neighbors. Chechnya, the southern Muslim republics, he came out, he had a softer tone. He's now returning to what he was. And the Russian oligarchs, both basically they're oil-oriented, are tied to globalist banking. And they said, we need to strike a middle ground here with him. And this is the story of why he started becoming more moderate, but he's returned.
Israel just signed a deal. They're doing the pipeline across the Mediterranean going into Europe to buy package. They can't get Syria to do the pipeline that they want, from United Arab Emirates and, Caspian, whatever, to go through Afghanistan doing the Syria thing. They aren't able to do that, so now they have to get oil out from where? The Golan Heights, which they seized from Syria, that Israel somehow gave permission for exploration to, called Genie, corporate or genocide, Genie, and the board of directors, we uncovered this in 13, and it's just now becoming common knowledge. Rumsfeld, Cheney, Rockefellers, all these guys now have concessions for oil that they discovered enormous reserves of natural gas in Syria's Golan Heights that they're going to say is theirs, and they're going to build their own pipeline to Europe to bypass Turkey, Syria, and Russia.
Exactly.
That's what this whole thing is about.
Because right now Russia supplies over 1/3 of European home heating oil. And this is why NATO can be more aggressive now, because as Ernie's saying, there are now workarounds that Europe has. They're not going to be totally dependent on Russia, and Russia just can't freeze them out now.
It's Russia's only source of income.
I wouldn't go that far, but it's a major source of income. Yes.
I know there's other little skirmishes throughout. The interesting ones are in Africa right now. In Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and the Chinese influence in Sudan. And, they're under the radar. Do you know much about it?
I know quite a bit about it because I talked to people from South Africa that had to leave for their own personal safety. A man named Aubrey Brocken, who was a pastor in South Africa, had his property taken, his life threatened. He now resides in New Zealand, and he provides me with, and he's not the only one, but they provide me with African media stories that never get released in the West.
This is more serious, I think, than most of us really realize.
Well, let me take you to the point here. Let me take you to your point. I think Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah.
Chinese are partnered with South Africa in the land grab, and next door in Zimbabwe they have put surface-to-air missiles so they can't be interfered with. That's running in the African media. So you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make sure we didn't gloss over that point. What else did you want to say?
Those are some choke points that are going to be some really flare-ups that are going to cause some real major problems, in my opinion.
Well, China is largely motivated by food right now. They have a huge food crisis, and they've entered into an agreement with the South African government to assist with the theft of white farmer land, and China gets the food, and they will split the minerals on the land for the use of Chinese technology to extract it. But the Chinese, what's more ominous than that agreement is, as I've just indicated, it's not just surface-to-air missile batteries. They're committing their military to protecting this operation against foreign interference, namely the West. So if you and a peacekeeper will touch this, okay? But if the United States suddenly decide, we're going to put an end to this, we're going to provide a relief effort, we'll evacuate South African farmers in the midst of this coming crisis and genocide, the Chinese have already set up shop to where they're not going to let that happen.
It's the platinum in South Africa.
Pardon me?
It's the platinum in South Africa.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's platinum.
Right now, just not Russia, right now the Chinese are the biggest threat to America.
Yeah, it depends what yeah, exactly. I agree with what Ernie said. Let me just say this. You're right. There's a lot of points of contention between ourselves and the Chinese, but I'll go back to something I just said. The French identified the Chinese as a global problem because of their nationalistic tendencies. And we will never align directly with China in the foreseeable future, but Russia can. Russia's married to them from an energy standpoint. Russia started that process about 6 years ago. I could see a Russian-Chinese alliance partnering with America in the form that I indicated earlier if the European Union gets a little too active on behalf of the Bank of International Settlements. I could see that happening. It would be an uneasy partnership. But it was an uneasy partnership when we had troops in China, because their troops used to murder our troops, much like the Muslim Brotherhood did in Africa. We've never had a good relationship with China from that perspective. But I could see us allying in the same uncomfortable way we did in World War II. I could see that happening, but Russia would have to be the middleman in that deal. Yes?
Aren't several nations trying to leave the European Union, like The Brexit, and even, wasn't it the Swedes or the French that wanted out, and Italy?
Well, Italy has committed the unforgivable sin. They've closed their borders to Muslim and African immigration.
How dare you?
Yeah, they're actually turning away the ships. They've got a populist leadership, but listen, look what's happening to Italy's economy. They're being punished.
Yes.
And they're being driven into a depression. And so, yes, Poland, Czechoslovakia, other nations would like to join, but they're held in check to some degree by economics. Although the Poles and the Czechs are really, really aggressive in asserting their nationalism.
You mean they want to get out of the national...
I can't say they want out of the European Union because I've not read that directly from Poland or Czechoslovakia or Italy, but their expressed philosophies, their allegiance to their own nationalism and their way of life and the right to protect their borders, that would certainly lead you to believe that they'd like to follow and have their own version of Brexit. Which, by the way, the British people are going to lose. They'll be back in the EU within a year. Yeah, they're going to be back. This is why I'm saying, if you think, look, how are we doing on time? Let me take a look here. Okay, if we take a look at America and its role in this, okay, I'm not in love with the Republican Party, but I vote mostly Republican now because the values come closest to what I'd like to preserve. That's not an endorsement. There are Republicans I like. There are some Democrats I respect. Not many. Because the...
Tell me who it is.
Yeah.
Right, who said it's okay?
There's, yeah, you know, I don't want to go through the roll call. Let me just say this. There's some decent people on all sides of the argument, but they're marginalized. They're marginalized by people with power. They're marginalized because they're numerically inferior on their committees in Congress. And we need to finally just take a real cold, hard look. Let me just tell the story this way. Trevor Loudon, I think, did the best work I've ever seen done in this area about treason within Congress towards the Constitution and our way of life. And he produced a documentary called Enemies Within. And it's available on Amazon Prime, but I've heard it's also now made its way over to YouTube. I'm surprised it's still up. He names 80 people connected to Congress, and he's not alone. Let me step aside and say Cynthia McKinney, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney told me the same thing. Robert David Steele, former CIA decorated field officer who did clandestine operations, he told me the same thing. And Alan West, Congressman Alan West told me the same thing. They all tell the same story. They don't necessarily say 80, West does. But what Loudon said, there are 80 of them who belong to front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood, the American Communist Party. And there are some parties that I dislike more than others. And you just mentioned, I just mentioned two of them. And by the way, little Kirsten Taliban Cinema, she was one of the 80 that got named. And, oh yeah, she, we'll find out soon enough just what we managed to get into office by hook and crook. But Trevor Loudon's point was these people are subversive. They serve a different agenda. If you look at motivation, I'm speculating, I think they're hoping they'll improve their position in a global order, both financially and also in terms of power, if they support the side that they think is going to win, and they're actively committing treason against the United States. And if you think these people are small potatoes, how about Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren as two other names? I mean, it's almost read like a who's who, with these people out of Congress. And Trevor Loudon nailed it. We have people in this country, and not just deep state holdovers from Obama, okay, and going back even beyond him. These people are people who are dedicated to this philosophy. And I indicated earlier, you've got about 55 to 60% of our young people, the millennials, who are dedicated to this philosophy. I don't think they fully understand what it means. You can't bring in Bolsheviks, and this is what we're talking about doing. You can't have Bolshevism without genocide. It's never happened. Show me a time in the history of the planet where you've had this kind of purge and this dramatic of a shift, that's proposed in the government, and you haven't had
a genocidal approach. This is why I said we're past the point of no return. This cancer is deeply inside the power centers of our government. We had 8 years of a president who was totally dedicated to this. And we can say what we want about borders and xenophobia, but what's going on our southern border, I'm not worried about Tijuana. I'm worried about the paramilitaries who break off and are crossing this country's borders in unguarded areas in big numbers. MS-13, I mean, let's just take James Comey. He said ISIS, and he said this July 4th, 2016, ISIS is in every state. So is MS-13. And what's MS-13's job? To assassinate political opponents. That's how the drug cartels have used it. And maybe I should go down this other rabbit hole. You want to know what the pedigree of these people are that are crossing our borders? They're not up against the fence. Some of them are agitators. And I got told by a guy in DHS about 6 weeks ago, he was being dispatched to San Diego, and he said, there's a new strategy, Dave. They're going to put the men behind, who are the agitators, the ones who are trying to cause trouble, and they're going to put the women and children and old people up front and try to break through the gates. And he said, that's our idea of what's going on. We're going down to train border security on how to deal with it. Well, was he right? This is exactly what's happening now. But let's take a look at who these other people are. You see, I don't fear the person who wants to come here for a better life. I don't fear them. I mean, a lot of people disagree with me on that, but they'll come here, they'll fit in, they'll become part of our society. If we ever let them become citizens, they would pay taxes, you know, and listen, I've talked to so many people who've been here in this boat. They come here for a reason, not to hurt us. But there are people coming into our country with bad intentions.
Yes.
And where they are from and who put these people together is noteworthy. And I've been writing about this for 4 to 5 years. It is not Dave Hodges telling you. There are people from the DEA and the Border Patrol and other groups, intel groups, who are speaking through me, who are so consistent in their message, you can't ignore it. When you go to, if you've ever heard my interviews with Kathy Rubio, who has eyes on these camps I'm going to talk about, who has relatives who have worked in them, but in El Salvador and now in Honduras, it's spread. There are trainers there from people from our government, the CIA, elements of the Army, who are training paramilitaries how to come into our country and how to conduct. I want to finish this line of thinking first. And they are training them how to act as paramilitary operations. And it's not just that, it doesn't stop there. I was approached by not one, but 2 DEA people about 6 months apart during the last Central American immigration invasion. Remember the beast train and all that, 2014. And what I learned was a group called the Sanchez Paredes, okay, and now they're called the Shining Path. And they're out of Peru. They're the Peruvian army, the Peruvian National Bank, effectively. They're the Peruvian power structure. They put together Middle East terrorists, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Hezbollah, and they are commingling them with the drug cartels. That's who's making up these paramilitary groups. And this is right now constituting a subversive force. And when I write a lot about Red Dawn, this is what I'm writing about. Now, they can't conduct, in my humble opinion, a military operation on their own and hope to really make inroads. They can do terrorism, but as far as, territorial acquisition and normal military tactics, they can't unless we're already at war. And if we're at war and weakened, then there's a problem. And in support of what I'm telling you, the Chinese are part of this too. The Chinese have these solar energy farms, and go look at where they're located. They're on interstate highways next to military air bases like Davis-Monthan, Luke Air Force Base, Nellis up in Nevada. Well, why are they there? Well, they're run by a company called Cinta, which is a front group for the Chinese military. And I believe they're there to try to inhibit air cover in case we're invaded if we're already at war and through our southern underbelly. But these people have already come across in great number. They're going to come across in greater number. Now, you're saying, Dave, do you have any proof for this? This goes back 12 years. In 2006, a Tucson police memo talked about drug cartels and Hamas and Hezbollah present in Arizona. 2010, that got repeated by DPS. So we already have history in our state of acknowledging this. The Texas Rangers will privately tell you, because I've had a number of them talk to me off the record, and they have the tacit approval of Governor Abbott to do talking on this. Just don't bring the credit back to yourself individually. but they will tell you that they're worried about these groups taking over small towns, executing police departments. I mean, this is how far these discussions are going. I mean, it's so well documented, it's beyond even question. And then I bring in someone like Kathy Rubio, who's been there, who has relatives working there, and she can go and blend in with the crowd. She's very fluent in Spanish. And she said, Dave, it's everything that you've been writing about. It's everything that you have been told by these other people. And if you want more proof of that, Judicial Watch got a hold of documents back in, I believe it was 2014, that exposed the existence of a paramilitary base camp 8 miles from El Paso, 3 miles on the other side of the border. Hamas, Hezbollah, the drug cartels, ISIS. And then they had a list of targets that they published. Ready?
Well, I was trying to get this.
Oh. Targets? Mostly infrastructure targets in New Mexico. New Mexico State University, power companies, those are the targets. And I don't remember much more. I'd have to go back and look at my own article I wrote on that because I published what Judicial Watch had. Go ahead.
On this Tijuana last weekend, there was attempted breakout where they tried to storm the border. 49 of the so-called refugees made it across into American territory. They were caught and rounded up. They were arrested, and not one of the 49 is going to be prosecuted.
Nope.
Not one.
The courts have seen to that. A lot of people are accusing Trump of not doing his job or having his people do their job, but this is from the liberal courts. Yes?
Dave, if the U.S. did away with the war on drugs, do you think that border security and the migrant invasion problem would be better or worse?
The war on drugs has fueled what's going on. It's funded it, it's fueled it. One of the DEA guys that approached me back in 2014, and we actually met in a Denny's in Surprise to discuss this, leave your cell phones in the car kind of thing. And he told me about this case. The guy's name was Ebola, and it was 2010. And so he's really giving me open source data. It was a federal court case against him. He was part of the Sinaloa drug cartel. He made the claim in court they couldn't prosecute him because Obama's DOJ said 20% of these drugs can be interdicted, but 80% cannot. And he was the part of the 80% that couldn't be interdicted. He got off. He also was connected to the Sanchez Perez drug cartel that I said was the facilitator of these paramilitary forces. Okay, which is why this DEA agent told me this, because that was his main focus. And oh, by the way, do you remember when Trump canceled his trip to South America in April? Well, what Paul Preston from Agenda 21 Radio, the president of the New California Movement, told me was that people inside the Trump administration had told him they had come across an assassination attempt plot by the Shining Path, which is the Sanchez Perez drug cartel. And now here, Trump back to South America. I think it's a huge mistake. I think it's a huge mistake. And then when you combine, this is a dinner discussion we had last night. I was in the minority. My son and wife ganged up on me. You've no doubt seen the red dots on Trump when he was making his Christmas tree speech. First of all, that didn't look like sniper red dots to me. Okay, they were too big and broad, but it doesn't matter. And this is what I was telling my wife last night. It's the message that gets delivered. The story is, oh, it's just a bunch of teenagers being funny. Okay, well, first of all, if you saw someone with a laser doing that, would the Secret Service drag them out by their hair? I mean, come on. I think there was a message there. Not that it was an assassination attempt, but I think there was a clear message there. And is Trump a marked man? Well, some of the people I talk to say yes. Why do you think the Marine Corps is doing most of the security? If you know anything about the Kennedy assassination, Kennedy in the lead car, Kennedy going 14 miles an hour on a curve around the book depository, which is a violation of Secret Service protocol, having all the windows open without a walk-through in Dealey Plaza. The Secret Service set him up. They set him up. And you think Trump doesn't know this? This is why the Marine Corps provides a good amount of his security. He's a marked man. But I will tell you, I think there's part of the deep state to assassinate him because of the public backlash. See, the problem is now, if Trump gets killed, hey, all those conspiracy theorists, they must be right. And our stuff is still there. And they can start to devour it. This is why I think Trump is still alive.
Yes, I have the proposal on this about being a dropout or opting out. And
now, what was the first thing you said? A proposal
I
about?
have a proposal to drop out or to opt out. You opt out here today if you don't be in a medical plan. You become a dropout. But I proposed to Trump, about a year ago when he was forced to sign.
You're in front of the camera.
Sorry about that. My proposal is this. When Trump, remember, he was basically forced to sign a bill, a gross bill submitted by both houses of Congress to put sanctions on Russia. And he was reluctant to do it. But he had to do it because it'd be overridden by, over 2/3 of the Congress. And I say, we know the Constitution says when the president's submitted in a gross bill, he can either, sign it, he can veto it, or let it become law without a signature.
Correct.
And what I suppose I'm trying to write to him, especially in light of last week when he submitted those answers, to Mueller, and then I said, my gosh, aren't these lawyers telling him something? I've been trying to tell him, communicate with him. I said, all he has to do, and this would be the first time in the history of the United States, is sign the bill without prejudice. Now, an attorney, he would understand that, what that means. Without prejudice, it means you reserve all rights. And one attorney told me, what does without prejudice mean, part of your signature? It means your signature is worthless. And could you imagine, damned if he does, damned if he does not. And he had to sign that bill. Now he submitted these questionnaires to Mueller, and they can set him up for a perjury charge. And if I ever were to go in the courtroom, I've done this myself. I go in the courtroom and says, I'm here without prejudice. Everything I do, say, omissions or whatever, is without prejudice. I'm looking out for number one. I want protection for me.
Well, I tried to. Trump should never have submitted anything.
Oh, ridiculous.
No, he's giving legitimacy to an illegitimate process. And, the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and you don't have to be a lawyer to understand this, they are put on their job to investigate a crime, not to find if there is a crime. In other words, the presupposition is the crime's already happened, now we're going to get into it. Instead, he's been on a 2-year fishing expedition. And what do we get? We got a man named Cohen facing long prison who's saying, well, Trump was going to put his business in Russia. Well, I heard an interview that Jim Bohannon did the other night with a lawyer, and he said, we may not like it, it may be unethical, but the president has the right to do it, there's no crime. And I keep hearing that over and over and over. But it's another example of a fishing expedition that needs to end. Now, I was hopeful it would end. When Trump took the infamous ride with Rosenstein on Air Force One, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to get fired. You see, this is where Trump is pretty smart and he's pretty savvy. We call Putin the jazz master. Well, Trump has his moments. This is one of them. If you know who Rosenstein's wife is, he just cut a big hole in the deep state. She is the fixer for the deep state. Her name is Lisa Barsubian. I did an article on her last summer. She's represented the Clintons 62 times. She's represented all these deep state causes. She is a shot blocker for FOIA for the FBI, yet she uses an NIH email, so she can't be FOIA'd. I mean, first of all, that's fraud. Right there, she should get in trouble for doing that, because she's not part of the NIH in any way, shape, or form. So Rosenstein goes on this ride, and rather than getting fired, Trump starts singing his praises. And I'm thinking the man's been flipped. And this is where I don't think we've seen Trump had really a lack of response to the Democrats taking over the House. Trump should have sent the DOJ here to Maricopa County. Do we all agree on that point? There should have been a federal investigation the second day of the counting of the paper ballots based on what I was hearing. But he didn't. He doesn't care. he has neutralized, through Rosenstein, Democrats who have a history, who can be leveraged, who can be blackmailed. And Obama did this to get Obamacare through with Republicans. They leveraged something at the last minute based on their bad deeds. And this is what I believe Trump is doing. So we talk about all of the things the bad guys are doing. Trump is fighting back, but I'm curious to see where this leverage is headed. Now, I got to say this, and boy, people get so pissed off at me on my channel. I don't buy the QAnon nonsense. Okay, first of all, Doug Hagman's a private investigator. He has the ability to unlock certain things that you and I can't. There are 300 sealed indictments in the United States today. 300, not 55,000. And yet there hasn't been one shred of evidence that anyone is under indictment. Not one. Don't tell me about 10 extra beds in Gitmo. I could care less about that nonsense. I want to see proof that he's preparing to move on people in the way that QAnon says. QAnon is getting people to relax. Justice is going to be done. It's okay, boys and girls. Daddy's in control. You can go to bed now. Do you know who I think QAnon is? He's part of the Mueller establishment. It's someone connected to Mueller, because who better to take the pressure off? Mueller is in deep trouble. If he fails in what he's doing, he could go to prison for treason. He could even be executed. Look, we gave the Russians highly enriched uranium, and we executed the Rosenbergs in the 50s for selling secrets. Which is worse? His life is at stake here. So, QAnon, I'm sorry. I see Robert Mueller interests playing a role in this. And oh, people get so pissed off at me when I say this. But then I say to them, please show me 1 ounce of proof. There isn't any. Yes, sir.
What do you think about the Mueller convention?
Oh, yeah. I've done a lot on that, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they transferred Bolger, and the very next day they transferred him, and still, Goldman Hotel, Mueller cost the United States $100 billion. We allowed innocent people to be convicted of murder. They were in jail for 4 years, the Lady Bolger did. When it was found out they were released, and the federal government paid them off at $100 billion.
Yeah. Let me say this. I don't think this has anything to do with the deep state. It was Robert Mueller trying to be upwardly mobile in his position, showing he could bust people. And Bolger was willing to play ball as long as he was free to roam. And he murdered a lot of innocent people in the process. And that makes Mueller a backdoor accessory. So, exactly. I don't think at that point we're seeing any deep state connection, but we're seeing a man who would employ really devious and illegal means to try to gain power within the Bureau, in which he eventually became the director. But you don't even have to go there. Let me answer his question this way, too. James Comey. You know what James Comey's job was before he became FBI director?
HSBC.
Thank you. Yeah, board of directors. Now, Hillary Clinton. You got it. I interviewed VP from HSBC, who's kind of on the run now, but he took evidence on this, and Hillary Clinton, drug cartels, child sex trafficking profits, drug profits, money being laundered through boiler rooms, fake accounts, some of them taken out with your names and social security numbers. John Cruz, who was a senior VP at HSBC, I've interviewed him 4 times, he took the evidence to DHS, and it was under the control of Obama, got no traction. And then he went to the Federal District Attorney of the Eastern Division in New York, and she said, oh, I think there's something here. And they prosecuted HSBC for communications violations, but not really on the outstanding crimes. They took the lesser of all included charges. And that attorney, the Federal District Attorney, her name was Loretta Lynch, as in Loretta Lynch mob. And so when we look at that, Comey was on HSBC's board when all this was happening, and just magically, he goes to become the FBI director, and then you got Loretta Lynch, who becomes the AG. What a nice den of thieves that Obama put together in government. And it came out of this HSBC mess, which is organized crime. Hello, this comes back now to the Clinton Foundation, and this is where we started today. Okay, you have the FBI invading the home of a whistleblower of the Clinton Foundation. And who's involved? Mueller. And Mueller and Comey were joined at the hip in the early days of Mueller's ascendancy to power and then Comey taking over. I mean, these aren't coincidences. Yes, sir.
In total violation of Article 2, Section 2, the second paragraph, Mueller is illegal to this member confirmed by the United States Senate. It's right here. Right here.
I was not aware of that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because his appointment would require a senatorial approval.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
By the way, let me just help bring it full circle with what the earlier speaker was talking about. John Brakey, the gentleman that was mentioned by Irvin, started investigating and found evidence of fraud when Tucson, Pima County held their elections on their light rail. And literally within days, if not hours, of a judge ordering the ballots to be recounted, the FBI swooped in and those ballots have never been seen again.
Oh, and they did this in the run for Secretary of State in 06, 04 election. They're starting to question, whatever the hell's going on. And Harper, that you're talking about, Senator Harper of the Northwest Valley, he goes, they kept doing the recounts, and he kept having different numbers, a number of ballots, and it was competing frauds. One was the software, one was just put more ballots in. So finally, Harper goes, Senate subpoena, we're just going to count them here in the Senate caucus room, we'll get done in a couple hours, we're done. Sick of it, just do it. Boom, FBI comes in, sees them all, never heard any more about it. This stuff happens all the time. All the time. The one thing I wanted to bring up for I have
people with their
soccer
state
grandkids, but the bottom line is this. The big crypto wars that's going on, crypto's taking a dump, blah, 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 blah. Behind the scenes, I started seeing a pattern. I'm starting to do a little Dave Hodges here, I'm going, where's the conspiracy or whatever. So
it's not conspiracy, it's connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots. Yeah. No, it's a damn conspiracy, I guarantee that. But so what happens is, a very prominent, high-end, I respect one of the good guys in the space, I pontificated what my hypothesis was. Last night I get an encrypted message from him. I gotta have it reset it because I had to put the encryption thing to be able to decode, but I really want to read it later today. This is what I proposed. It seems to me that these guys that were going, all alternative cryptos must die, Bitcoin ABC, Bitcoin Cash, that they were going to have more privacy features in. Oh, you're just a bunch of money launderers. We need to have code is not law, law is law. We need central banking approval. The Crown pats you on the shoulder with their sword. This is fiat approved, Uncle Sam approved GoldmanSachs.gov coin. Okay? We're going to crypto. Get over it. These big
Bernie, I still got your paper wallet?
Yeah. Yeah. Paper wallets. Yes. Now the thing is that I knew that crypto can be a force for good or bad. Now of course they want to make it bad. What I realized, the question that I had, I started scratching the surface, and if you do this, you'll find the same thing. I am of the opinion the economy is going to take another big dump. 08 was just a warm-up, and before that, the savings and loans, and then we did 08, now here comes the big one. When that happens, it's going to go to crypto. They're going to be able to turn on and off. It won't demonetize you with YouTube. They demonetize you. Okay? You won't have your, Mark of the Beast thing. Now, what they're doing is they're doing it so they can launder. BCCI, HSBC, Bank of Arkansas, Georgia, all this stuff can't get rid of the pallets of cash fast enough. So they need a sanctioned crypto so that once it goes through a certain portal, boom, it's clean, I push the button, I didn't have to ship a single pallet of cash. This is what's coming. I put that out and kind of a little bit of tidbit, who this guy was, kind of the hypothesis, and I guarantee that's what's coming back. So will crypto shoot up? Probably. But it's going to have to be interchanged on the grid with government crypto and all this, So I'm going for the pirate money, and that's what we're doing on our stuff.
The Federal Reserve announced, you heard this, that they're developing a cryptocurrency in 2019.
Yes.
I did a podcast on it. Right off a news release, I think it was Bloomberg.
It's doing Lagarde.
No, it wasn't international. I know what you're talking about, Lagarde, but this was strictly Federal Reserve. I'm thinking a time frame. I'm telling you, it was within 2 months. I go back and search my YouTube because I did a podcast on it. And it's undeniable. Probably Google it, fine. Don't use Google. But Ernie's absolutely right. But I see another ominous element connected to this too, Ernie. The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 7 times in a low inflationary economy. It's only been done one time before in 1938, because Roosevelt really wanted to keep us in the Depression so he could keep implementing his programs. And the economy was actually showing little signs of life, so they had to basically kill the goose at that time until World War II starts. So cycle forward, here we have low inflation, and we have a GDP unmatched by any year Obama ever had, and they have to kill it, and they kill it with interest rates. And the Fed have said that they're going 5 more times on interest rates hikes. So therefore, you've got a situation now where the Fed will have raised interest rates 12 times in a low inflationary environment. That's destructive to the market. I just interviewed Bob Kudlow on this from Trade Genius, and he talked about the devastating effect on the market. And he said also, to combine that, the elite are pulling their money out of the market, so they're going to blow that up. And he also said they're reporting gold again, so they're going to blow that up. And you go forward, and what Ernie's saying here, I think, is absolutely correct, but I think there's one other motive, that when the dollar crashes, the Federal Reserve is not going to wallow in its own mess. They've got an escape pod, and it's called cryptocurrency. Yes. And they're going to force all of us into it. I think, Ernie, you're right on the money with that.
Nice, George. And make any competing one illegal and death penalty or counterfeit kick your ass.
Well, I'm kind of surprised that these alternative currencies have got off the ground. Because, that's, violation, and Secret Service shows up and arrests you and all that stuff. And you look at John Kennedy, what happened to him? I think one of the 5 reasons he was killed was because of the silver certificates. Federal Reserve will take no competition.
I'll tell you why. It's because the technology allows for it doesn't matter what they do.
That's true.
So that was the one thing that the cat got out, the genie got out of the bottle, they don't know what the hell to do. Because you have the mechanism with these different servers and nodes and this technology of decentralization that you can have this money work, and they can't do anything about it, so they have to bring it in so you can. Well, it's the exchanges, where you can exchange it for fiat and so on. That's what they're targeting. And I've been watching this develop from the beginning. I've been doing this for almost 10 years. And I tell you, it is, for those of us that experience it or got a little gray, it's so neon flashing obvious what's happening. Well, we're starting to find out. And this is not going to be a nationalism battle between countries. That's going to be the sanction, or the sanctuary for the conservatives and the right and so on, the constitutionalists and all that.
So you think they're going to be tricked into taking it, is what you're saying? In other words,
they're going to be in opposition to it, but then it'll be some nationalism, they'll put the right name on it, or the right logo, or the right spokesperson, or something. But what the real battle is half of the planet is not even on the internet yet. In the next 3 years, there will be ubiquitous satellite communication. Everybody will be issued their smartphone by Bezos. You'll have little kids in Congo trading with little kids in Chile. And I'm going, when that happens, all these new people come on, will they have to get a retina scan to get a bank account? Will they be able to do their own? Will they be totally off the grid and create their own economy? So that's what the threat is. It's not some state or even a philosophy. It's going to be individuals with a decentralized mindset that are trading without permission. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be individual, not nation states, individual state in my head. So when we are decentralized, that's the threat, that's what they're going after.
I think you're right, and I think you're talking about that's the economic unification key they're going to play. Did you all see, and I did a podcast on this too, last week the UN said by 2030 they will be the global authority? You all see that? And then they followed it up by having a document they dispersed to all countries saying, if you disagree with UN, migration, blah, blah, go to jail, lose your business, don't get on the internet. Okay, that was just a few days after that. Australia told them where to go, Netanyahu told them where to go. I haven't heard Trump's response or any of those responses yet. But that's the political unification tool. And I think what Ernie's talking about here is the economic unification tool. And I will tell you this, I really don't care about the political unification tool. It's economics that will drive all this. It's economics that will end up taking away all your freedoms. Okay, and what Ernie's talking about here is far more important than what the UN is saying. Yes?
Dave, earlier in your presentation, you mentioned the shining path as possibly being an armed department of the elites to be able to go places and foment revolution or something like that.
Okay.
I thought the shining path, like 25, 30 years ago, wasn't there a Maoist group that was involved in one or two revolutions in Asia or South America?
I don't know the history. I know what they have changed their name to. And I don't know if there's a takeover involved. And to that, I would defer to Paul Preston of Agenda 21 Radio. But I've seen enough in print to know that Shining Path equals Sanchez Paredes equals the conduit between terrorists in the Middle East and the drug cartels in this hemisphere. So that part I do know. To go into more history, I'd have to defer to other people.
And real quick, you mentioned that the elites are trying to manipulate Trump to step down, Pence to step down, then we have Nancy Pelosi.
It's a theory. I think it's a theory. I'm not saying it's going to happen. That's my nightmare, is the way I expressed it.
If that were tried, would Pence have at least a couple of weeks, couple of months to pick another VP before it ever got to the point where Nancy Pelosi would even be part of the picture?
You know, I can't project all scenarios. That would ask me to look at all possibilities. I'm just saying, she's 2 beats away from the presidency, and with what she represents is everything in this room that I think most of us hold sacred, which is at least the Bill of Rights. We can disagree about the integrity of our government. I think I hear most of us would agree there's not much. But at least we have printed rights that are supposed to be constitutionally guaranteed. And see, that's the difference between us and the Europeans, where they have a different kind of legal system. You have rights in Europe in communitarian law until it's no longer in the common good. And who determines what the common good is? I like to call it the communist good. Because the Europeans have usurped all freedom with social media. You are aware of that, right? In Germany? Fined to go to jail. You're fined to go to jail for criticizing public officials on certain topics.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Facebook really censors Europe. Thanks, Ernie.
Party Saturday.
See you then.
Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged. Watch it. It's what he just mentioned.
Show me a socialist country that has a second amendment.
None. Not pretty like the time.
When this goes socialist, our second amendment goes, it's over.
Well, see, that's got to be the red line. There's only 2 red lines here. The preliminary one is the First Amendment, because that's what's going on today. People can't organize easily without a First Amendment. They can. I mean, you look at when Boston was put in martial law, you know, after the Boston Tea Party. The committees of correspondence still got the word out to the other colonists. And it can be done. But it sure makes it a hell of a lot harder if we don't have internet access. So First Amendment is really, really important. And because the First Amendment protects the Second Amendment from going away. Because it gives us an organizing platform. And the Second Amendment in my book, and see, I told you I don't advocate for violence. But you come to my door and you're wearing a blue helmet, that's a violent act if you're on my property looking for my gun. And that's my line in the sand with these people. And that's when I would, now I'm too fat to run, too old to fight, but I can still guard my yard as best I can. And the bottom line is I think this should be America's. And what the young people don't know is their history. These loving socialist millennial kids living in the basements of their parents, they don't understand the history of people like Mao and the promises he made, or the promises Stalin made when he came to power, or the promises Hitler made. All the despots start out the same way. I'm going to give you, help me get in power and stay in power, and then all hell breaks loose. And see, this is the phase that the Democrats are following right now. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not doing a right-left paradigm, I'm not doing Democrat-Republican, but I'm saying this evil resides primarily in the Democratic Party right now. Yes, the Republicans have their share. There was John McCain, there's Jeff Flake, I get all that. But this is headquartered with the Democrats today. They want your gun. And you know, we can argue xenophobia, but a country that does not have an orderly border is not a country. It's a geographic space. It's not a country. And we need immigrants. And let me just go on the record and say this. I'm not anti-immigration. First of all, I'm the son of one on my dad's side of the family. Second of all, the important thing to know is that we need immigrants to come here. You need 2.1 birth rate to maintain yourself. We are now at 1.77. No nation's ever recovered economically when they've dipped below 1.8. We are in the danger zone. But we don't need ISIS. We don't need MS-13. We don't need to admit subversives who have bad intentions for our people and our institutions. And this is why we need to have orderly immigration. Now, if they could do it at Ellis Island and process 13 million people without computers, why the hell can't we do it now? Well, the reason is Wall Street doesn't want it. They distribute, this isn't a secret, you all know this. Through the years, they've distributed flyers, come north, America wants you. There may be laws against you, but we want you here. And why do the corporations want these people? Because they can't complain. You violate labor laws, you underpay them, you don't have to pay their Social Security, you don't have to pay their income tax. It's a great deal for corporate America. And these people are caught in a perpetual state where they are caught between citizen and non-citizen, and their lives are hell as a result. And I'm not talking blanket amnesty, but I'm saying if we got 25 million people like that today, you're going to have 150 million people like this with what's coming out of South America. If you haven't been reading the projections of the caravans that are already coming and are being planned, we are going to be deluged. And the bottom line is, in all respect to people from other countries, how many people can you take from third world countries until you become the third world country? You just ask that question. How can our institutions survive? How can we afford health care for people who come here without jobs and many without education? And they're going to need assistance to get started. How can we maintain our roads and our schools? The schools will be overwhelmed. And this is why when Trump talks about a wall, I thought the wall was stupid. But I don't know if desperate times call for desperate actions, but we need to have orderly immigration. The key to solving this problem right now is to get about 20,000 federal judges, build them offices on the border, make sure they got great security, and then you start marching people in, and let's assess whether or not they are a good fit. But you can't admit tens of millions because of the devastating economic effect. You have to be selective. And if you look at Mexico's immigration laws, have you seen their laws compared to ours?
Yeah.
I know. And I'm not interested in putting migrants who are here illegally in jail unless they've committed crimes. And I'm not for that at all. But we can't keep absorbing this because, one, national security threat is real, and two, being economically and socially overwhelmed is a real threat too. And this is in part what happened to the Roman Empire. They took on too big of a burden of empire, and we're going to be doing it in reverse. In other words, the empire is coming to us, and we can't afford it. Yes?
I have an article on my website stating that the Roman Empire never really went away. It just migrated to Europe, and we are the military end of the Roman Empire, and we're no longer needed. Italy, Rome, that's the Christian end, or so-called.
Yeah.
And Britain is the banking end.
Listen, I don't disagree with you at all. I think you can get into the writings of like Knights Templar and get into some ancient history, and there's validity to what you're saying. My friend Vance Davis, formerly the NSA, who by the way introduced me to Francis Barwood, Vance has written about this. Vance has told me a lot about this. It was part of his National Security Agency training, where they learned the history of military power. And so I've heard this before, and you're absolutely right. And I think it's good to have an appreciation of our history and where it is. But right now, I don't want to worry about the lion in the jungle 800 miles away that could devour me. I want to worry about the bandit in my face that has a gun. And I think there are such urgent problems we need to deal with right now. And the border is an urgent problem. And a lot of people don't see it that way, but it is. And my heart goes out to the poor people who are in these caravans, who are here for what they think are legitimate reasons. America cares about people that are downtrodden. They want to give us a chance. This is what they've been told. And my heart goes out to them. But also, too, we've got to be practical and systematic about who we let into the country. And if we go another path, we're going to get more of what we've got. And folks, when the trouble starts, let me just tell you what you're going to look at. And this came to me from someone at DHS. He called it the Tet Offensive. When Johnson was lying to the American people in 1968 that we were winning the Vietnam War, keep supporting us, it'll be over soon, and then during the truce of the Tet Lunar New Year, The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army attacked every capital city and every province in South Vietnam and say, that's not exactly true, we're not going anywhere. This is what we're facing today with these terrorist groups. There will one day, and I believe we'll be involved, my friend Steve Quayle says we'll be in a war because America has to be weakened for these paramilitary groups to succeed. And I think there's logic in that, but when it starts, it'll be a Tet offensive. This is what we're letting into the country unwittingly because we're trying to be fair with people, help people who want to come here for their life, but we're not screening. And if you look at what Trump got knocked down by the federal judges when he first got into office, excuse me, he didn't try to keep people out of the Middle East. He wanted to screen them. What the hell is wrong with screening people for gang affiliations or terrorist affiliations? What are you afraid of?
Medical issues.
My family had to go through this. My wife's family, 2 generations removed, had to go through Ellis Island. We went back and we looked up their stuff and found their names. They had to go through medical screening. And by the way, that's a whole other avenue I don't have time to get into today. But I'll just throw you this. First of all, these people are bringing diseases here, Border Patrol, DHS telling you this, for which we have no immunity. Second of all, Ebola has to remain a possibility because it was before and it happened once before on American soil. And something I discovered since then, you'll like this. You go to my website, you can look it up. I wrote this article, I think, in the last 2 or 3 weeks. The CDC, and in partnership with Bill Gates and Crucell Laboratories, they own the patent to anything that is Ebola. Diagnostics and treatment. So if Ebola were to rage through a portion of the country, they're making money hand over fist. Crucell, C-R-U-C-E-L-L, Crucell Laboratories. And they did the groundwork on this. It's laid out in the article. If you send me an email, I'll send you back the link. You can go ahead and look this up. The documentation's airtight. The CDC owns the damn patent. And people say, well, the government. No, CDC is not government. Hello, it's Federal Reserve. You see, it's an agency given a mandate by the federal government to carry out governmental duties. They are not a government agency. It's just like the Federal Reserve setup. Right. And their job is also to make money. And the CDC, when they have patents on Ebola, don't you get suspicious? Don't you have to ask why? Why have you gone to the trouble of Ebola? Hello, welcome to the border. Yeah, and did you see also, too, was that news story where CDC flew 47 diseased people to San Diego? Did you see that? Yeah, I think this is just the beginning. Yeah, I got time for a couple more questions and then I got to scoop. Go ahead.
Why don't you go to Keith?
Keith, go ahead.
I appreciate your talking to first, it's better probably to export our good part of our American values to these other countries that have massive people coming up here that don't understand our ways, and always going 8% socialism.
Yeah, I agree. Well, there's another element to this. My Social 101 class, we talked about this. They said, well, we think we're overpopulated. They're buying into some of the mantra that's coming out of the UN. And I said, okay, do you know what the best way to lower the birth rate is? It's not through mandatory sterilization that Bill Gates talks about. It's about industrializing countries. Because when you look at the fecundity rate of women, how many children can they have from 14 to, say, 45 or 50? The average is 13. But if you have women with equality, you have women who are in the workforce, particularly if they have access to upper-level management positions, that greatly delays the birth of their first child, and then they're hesitant to have more children because it can be a career path inhibitor. Who's going to take care of the children? Industrialization lowers birth rates. And when you have third world countries, that's when you get the 6 to 7 per family birth rate. And in industrialized G20 nations, what is it collectively? I think it's 1.6. Europe is in severe decline. Italy is 1.2 birth rate. Like I said, we're 1.77. But why don't we industrialize? Because see, that's not the goal. That's the BS they tell us to manipulate us. And they don't want to share the wealth, which is another reason why they don't industrialize the third world. Because then they start getting educated and they start thinking about concepts like freedom. Can't have that.
Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that at least half of our problem with Islamic terrorism would almost evaporate overnight if we would just stop. It's never going to happen. But if we would backing up Israel on everything, stop the economic aid, stop helping them with their wars. I really believe that half of our terrorism worries would go away. What do you think?
I think there's merit to what you're saying, but then there's the other side of the argument. There's always two sides of that coin, and the second side of the coin says, war in the Middle East, we might be able to count on Israel to be like our quasi-rapid deployment force, but see, you're going to hear that though.
Sure.
We may not agree with it, and I think that argument's overdone in this day and age. But you're still going to hear that argument, particularly in Congress, where they're getting donations from Israeli government. No question about it. So I do agree. See, we have antagonized, but we've done so on purpose. What's the history of the elite? They invented the Cold War, did they not?
Yes.
We all in this room know this happened. We greatly exaggerated Soviet nuclear prowess. We overstated the numbers. We know now most of their missiles wasn't fired properly. We know that Russia was more than a paper tiger, but it wasn't equal to the United States. That was one. Okay, so the Russian threat dies out. What takes its place? Terrorism. So how do you get terrorism going? You treat people like garbage. And you get them to point the finger at countries like the United States and countries in Europe. And so you have now the great manufactured conflict. So you're talking about a conflict. Israel profits from this conflict.
Yeah.
This is why they push it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Well, Dave, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with your position about you think immigration is good. And I understand the one point.
I said, reasonably, to be very clear, and I'll let you attack what I said. Reasonable, systematic, and measured immigration is good.
Here's the problem. What's happening now since they passed the Immigration Act of 1965? They've excluded all of Europe, almost completely, and all of our immigration is coming from third world countries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a retired airline captain at American Airways, United Airways, and I've been every capital city and country in Central and South America, and a whole bunch of third world countries, everywhere else. I can absolutely assure you, I know these countries like you guys know Arizona, and I can absolutely take this to the bank. Most 90-something% of these people don't have a clue about federalism, liberal government, and the things we hold dear, and the Constitution, Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. What we're doing, and we're changing the demographics of this country, that all these people coming in, if they were conservative Republicans, our border would be close tighter to Trump. The Democrats, these are future Democrat voters, and we haven't stopped this because once you switch Texas and Arizona and a couple other states from red to blue, you'll never see a conservative Republican president ever again.
Oh, I agree that Trump is the last conservative president, the way things are going. I agree. Listen, we're in complete harmony here. Let me go back and let me specify specifically, I'll give you numbers. I'm for reasonable, measured immigration, okay, and whether it's need-based or not, we can debate that. In other words, you fill certain priorities for jobs, like a lot of countries do, including Russia. But we need to go from 1.77 to 2.1, and you stop. That's why I say we need immigration.
No, we just need to stop aborting babies.
You know what I'm saying? And we need to get to the 2.1, but you could also argue, and you said something that's a really good point. My relatives came here, they had to go through a 7-year naturalization process where they learned U.S. government, they learned American history, and they had to pass tests on them as well as a language test. That should be a prerequisite as well.
But the test today, I have my housemates. They're Hispanic, I love them, they're great people, but they got their citizenship card, and I was talking to them about this, and they said when they took the test for the immigration, the citizenship, they gave them the answers and they memorized it. They still don't have a clue anything about the Constitution or anything else. It's a joke. It's a fraud. It's a scam operation. And as much as I love these people, they don't have a clue about limited government or the Constitution or Bill of Rights and Federalists.
Okay, but if we take what you're saying and let me carry it out to the next step. Let's say we close it down today. Okay, if we don't close that gap between what our population rate is now and what it needs to be, okay, oh God, I know, and here comes it. You're being liberal, Dave, but here's the bottom line. Tell someone who's 64 years old, who's 364 days old, and tell them they're not getting their Social Security, tell them they're not getting their Medicare. After they've been through the system all this time, we're just going to cut them off because we can't meet the push-through that's needed behind them in this Ponzi scheme. And yes, it's a Ponzi scheme. And yes, we need to find an alternative. But we can't go from having these social programs with the needed people to push them through to all of a sudden cutting off the people who'd be the beneficiaries who paid into it their whole life. There has to be a reasonable alternative before you do that.
Okay, either way, we're killing because the ways are going down. This is going to be a third world country if we keep this up.
We're getting there now. Our IQ in this country, he's right. You see, you're preaching the choir in a lot of ways. We just may disagree on what the final solution is. But right now, our IQs in this country are down 6 to 7 points. That's significant. And see, it's not like Vietnam immigration, where we got people who had to flee communism, but they were professors and doctors, and they were people who were educated and cultured. We're getting people who can't make ends meet where they're coming from, and they bring with them oftentimes the spirit of working hard, okay? And I think a lot of them want to fit in. And there's one thing we forget. We have a better deal with immigration here than Europe does. Europe is like mixing gasoline and fire. You're bringing people in from the Muslim culture to Christian cultures that don't mix. They don't mix culturally. Their beliefs are different. Sharia law versus established government law. In the United States, the people who are coming into our country are Catholic, generally by virtue of their background, and this gives them some buy-in to Western culture. Their transition is easier, I think, because of that, psychologically and ideologically, than what the Europeans have. And I'm not saying this is used to excuse unbridled immigration. I'm saying, but we have it better than the Europeans do. This is why we're not seeing massive riots in our country yet that you're seeing in France and Germany and Sweden. Because, you know, we share, to some degree, some measure of common heritage.
I think you're right about that. But beware. The Muslims move in a little bit at a time, and eventually they take over. That's their motive.
Flint, Michigan.
Right.
I don't argue with you. And they want Sharia law. Sorry. You can advocate all you want for Sharia law. You can go through the democratic process and get it changed. But the minute you engage in an act of terrorism, that subject them, in my opinion, to DOJ and FBI crackdown. But with this FBI, they try and be serving them food.
Right.
I'm in agreement with what you're saying.
Cool.
This is not Sharia law country. Sorry. I respect their right to have their religion. They can have that belief. But this is the land of the U.S. Constitution. There's no compromise on that point. Yes?
A little bit of contradiction in what I'm hearing. Support for Israel is not the cause of terrorism. And if we stop supporting Israel, then we'll stop terrorism. Because the goal of the Muslim Brotherhood, Islam, is to spread everywhere throughout the world. The MSA, you heard the MSA? MSA, the Muslim Student Association. They're on over 400 different campuses throughout the United States, university campuses. They have a national annual Hitler Youth Week. I teach Muslim Brotherhood in America, so I know. Have you read the Quran?
You're right about what you're saying. But to characterize it as only a Muslim problem is not correct.
No, I didn't say that. What I'm saying is you cannot equate the ending of terrorism by separating ties from Israel. Because they're two separate issues.
Is support of Israel been antagonistic to various Muslim groups? I think I'm questioning the answer is yes. Now, sometimes some of these Muslim groups need to be opposed because of their nature, because of what they're up to. But also, too, I agree with what you're saying, because in some of our administrations in the past, we've taken an unbridled support of Israel, without really looking at some of the manifestations about why the Muslims are rising up. Because in some cases they are being persecuted. But let me just say this. When you characterize groups like the NSA and say they're doing this, I could also talk about Mecha. Now, most people of Latino descent in this country would have nothing to do with this group. But they're the group that wants to take 8 states, okay, and create the independent state of Oxlawn and deport all white people of European descent and have their own government. Now, any reasonable person is going to go, are you out of your mind? You see, there are extremist groups from all walks of life. And that Mecha group is an extremist group. Now, they've toned down a little bit because they're trying to get political legitimacy in the Cal Exit movement by being invited into it. But those are their root beliefs, and it's no different than what Sharia law says. It's the same thing.
These are not, there's no radical Islam. No such thing. and you start, I'll just read them up, and I have proof to show you. They tell you that. Go to Islam.net and watch their videos. Read the Quran. Listen to the care of Texas, who said if you are a practicing Muslim, you are above the law of this land.
Who said that?
The director for
CAIR, the organization CARE.
CARE is an identified terrorist organization. You don't believe that under the U.S. vs. Holy Land Foundation, the largest terrorist funding network case in the United States, adjudicated in November of 2009, part 2 of that trial was to indict and try CARE, NATE, North American Islamic Trust, ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. They're Hamas. CARE is Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And
You're right.
If we're going to start saying that, well, if we separate from Israel, Israel's committing atrocity. They attacked us in 1965 when they shot down 67.
Okay, but hold on. I don't want to go into history here because here's the bottom line. Like I said, I want to deal with here and now in this, and there's a lot of merit. There's a lot of merit to what you're saying. I've written articles about the extremists in this country who want Sharia law and how they want to bring it in. Okay, and a lot of what you're saying has merit, but I don't want to go back to 1965 agreements right now because what I came to present to you today, and I only touched the surface, is that the threats to this country are a multitude. I've had people ask me, could we have an EMP attack? Yes. I think that's down my list, okay, because I think you inherit a shell of a country with very few resources. Will you have biological chemicals? I think without question. And I think the disease element at the border, for which we have no immunity, maybe bring in Ebola in a contrived fashion, that's a possibility. Will we have widespread terrorism like I described with a Tet offensive kind of an event? Yes. Could there be a Red Dawn? Yes, if we're involved in a war. Could a war be invented over Ukraine or Syria? Absolutely. And then we have trouble here domestically because of the terrorist groups we have in our country and the subversion groups like MS-13. I mean, folks, we have so many enemies, we couldn't cover this in a month of discussion. And we've been so infiltrated through government and in the past, like Obama, who invited the first Russians into the country. You know about that. The foreign minister of Russia signed an agreement with FEMA in 2011. Next year, they're training at Fort Carson. The troops there didn't like it. I've talked to some of these people. I talked to the housekeeper of one of the commanding generals on the base, who when she left his employee, she contacted me and said, let me tell you what I know. And the troops don't like it, but they were forced to do it by Obama. This is subversion of the United States. Absolutely. When Obama took over, he killed the F-22 overflights that would have protected us from Russian invasion. He cut back on submarine patrols. He gave away 7 Alaskan islands that were oil-rich to the Russians, and some of them had strategic military purposes behind them. I mean, this is what we have faced. And now we're facing it head-on, that our way of life is in a crossroads. We could be no more America. We could be whatever the globalists give to us. We are absolutely on our last legs. Do I think Trump says disgusting, stupid things at times? Yes. Is he presidential? No. But as I said earlier, he's the only game in town. He's the only man with a measure of power that stands between us and the total takeover. Can you even imagine what Hillary Clinton would have brought us? We had already had World War III. She said debate number 2. She said there'll be no fly zones. Well, who the hell would she have shot down? The Russians. And how would they have responded? We'd already be in the middle of the shit that I'm talking about right now if she were elected president. This is why I fear Nancy Pelosi. She's not smart enough to make those decisions with the people that control her arm. Yes?
Barack already tried the EMP. Remember those 4 generals that were fired and the nuke that went off in the ocean? They got fired because they made that nuke go off in the ocean rather than our...
Oh, no, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And when Lindsey Graham gave his little warning about nukes going off in Charleston Bay, he was speaking symbolically. He knew too. It's exactly what he was talking about. Alex Jones knew when he reported on it the same year. I mean, that's no secret. I mean, and yes. And by the way, if you don't think we had a nuke fired at us and it was brought down, remember the Hawaiian alert?
Yes.
that was not a faulty alert. That missile was brought down, and it was going to implicate North Korea, and it was going to commence World War III. I mean, that's what they want. This is their entire goal. Okay, I got time for 2 more, and then I got to scoop. Go ahead.
Briefly, you get it from the 1.77 to 2.1, 2 things. Get rid of marriage licenses, and get rid of an economic system where women have to work. And they'll come home and raise their kids. And the people here will bring that to 2.1 plus.
How about this one? That is physical.
And abortion too.
Lawsuit for that.
Go ahead.
Fine.
Thank you. I got to scoop. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to come back to my roots. You guys are great. Hey, did you see all the kids over here? That's who we need to educate. Seriously.
How about the parents?
Yeah. Good luck with that. Okay, thank you guys.